So in beginning, let me start by just expressing my actual humility in terms of being honored by standing before you today. I do believe that this is truly an exciting gathering. It's a unique opportunity which cannot actually be underestimated. So as actual part of looking at the passion that needs to be ignited in South Africa's economic growth path, government and the private sector equally do have an important role to play in this regard, because the country's entrepreneurs do have a significant role to play, and we therefore need to stand together and wrap our heads around the issue and the challenge of access to market that continues to plague our SMMEs. It also gives a sense of renewed hope for the country as a whole, because we can then say that although there's still a bit of work to be done, there's still a bit of work that lies ahead. However, we need to get ourselves on the right path in terms of ensuring that we are moving towards addressing the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And that can only be done with our SMMEs being strategically placed at the forefront of economic development. It's also supported by the World Bank stats that do indicate that, on the whole, small businesses across the world actually do have a significant contribution in terms of making sure that there are opportunities for job creation, as well as the fact that 90% approximately of the business interaction is actually from the sector. It's therefore regarded that business development, small business development in particular, should be correctly regarded as a high priority for not only the global governments, but specifically for the South African government, so that we are able to make sure that indeed the desired impact of growing the economy is actually achieved. We are well aware that we continue to face significant challenges in relating to the low growth. We continue to face significant challenges in relating to structured unemployment. An unacceptably high number of our youth continue to battle unemployment on a day-to-day basis. And they do need to realize that formal employment cannot be the only solution for the country. We therefore need to promote entrepreneurship as an alternative. Delivering the SONA address after the May elections, you would recall that the president of the country actually referred to what was termed a 10-point plan for reviving the economy of this country. There was emphasis, particularly for this new sixth administration, to say that we need to not only encourage, but we also need to put our full force behind nurturing entrepreneurship. There was also specific emphasis on the issue of social compacts, contracts between government and private, that would actually move us towards achieving this important goal. This can then be taken as acknowledgement on the part of the head of state to say that each of the key stakeholders that exist within society, government, private sector, the entrepreneurs themselves, equally have a role and responsibility in terms of moving the SMME sector towards what is actually required, promoting entrepreneurship, and thus actually also building the South African economy. In conclusion, he indicated that united we shall stand, divided we will actually fall. So it's clear that if we don't pull together as government, private sector, and entrepreneurs towards building the growth of this economy, the individual pockets of excellence, the individual contributions that each of us are claiming to be making towards growing this economy can actually end up being in vain. But at the end of the day, we should be encouraged when platforms such as this are actually presented for us to engage meaningfully in terms of how best to tackle the challenge of access to market. It must also just be acknowledged that government definitely must be central in terms of playing a role for SMME development, because contrary to the belief that is out there that says that if government's developmental agenda it can be antagonistic to business, there's a lot of countries that have actually achieved remarkable results in terms of entrepreneurial success. And we therefore cannot underestimate the role that government needs to play in this regard, the responsibility that we need to actually take in this regard. There's also the issue of saying that if, as a South African democratic government, we want to pursue the developmental agenda, we also need to make proper strides in actually promoting and properly supporting the small businesses. To the entrepreneurs that are in the room, I wish to emphasize the fact that this is a joint responsibility, meaning you should also be equally taking charge of your destinies as entrepreneurs so that you can actually also contribute towards growing your own enterprises. At the end of the day, over the past 2 decades, funding has really been prioritized to say we need funding, we need funding. But as mentioned earlier, if that funding comes without the proper business development support, if the funding comes and it doesn't have mentorship opportunities attached to it, if the funding comes and it doesn't have proper linkages with market access, not only in government, but in the private sector as well, it can actually lead to futile expenditure on the part of government, as well as futile investment by the private sector. So that is a key challenge that we actually have to collaborate and attempt to tackle and challenge going forward. I've mentioned that government should be central. Having said that, it's also important to acknowledge as a representative of government that whatever strides, whatever effort we've made up to this point in trying to promote entrepreneurship and support SMMEs can in no way, shape or form be deemed to be sufficient. There's still a lot of work that remains ahead. Hence the importance of the collaborations with the private sector to assist us in this regard. But one thing I can mention is that we do remain committed, though, towards making sure that we nurture the country's entrepreneurial spirit, so that indeed entrepreneurs can take charge of making sure that they contribute towards job creation and contribute towards growing the economy. We are well aware of the documented challenges that relate to access to market opportunities for SMMEs. So we cannot delude ourselves into thinking that the road that lies ahead towards achieving what we are looking to achieve is going to be an easy one. We've got all the good intentions, but we have to find ways of actually putting together the collective investments, the collective efforts to make sure that we move towards small business development. This is not only something that is happening within the confines of South African borders. We have repeatedly heard the state president indicating that South Africa is open for business. But that actually starts with each and every single individual that is in this room to say, what steps are we taking now to prepare a pipeline of SMMEs that can be ready to take up the opportunities that arise? What steps are we putting in place now to ensure that private sector equally comes to the table and contributes and plays a role also in terms of nurturing? Because it is not about the handouts, it's about the collaborative spirit that will enable us to actually create proper opportunities that can move our small enterprises forward. There's also a sense of optimism that then should come with interventions such as this one. And we need to make sure that as a Gauteng government, as enterprises, as private sector, we face the challenges, we engage on the challenges that confront us so that we're able to collectively find solutions. By way of an example, the program director mentioned that I'm coming from the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller. We did a study about 1.5 years ago, wherein we were going back to the supported entrepreneurs, supported enterprises, to say, when you came to us, the one cry that was there at the forefront was about funding. We've provided support in that regard. We've provided non-financial support. How has that impacted on the growth and sustainability of your businesses? And at the end of the day, the one key thing that the majority of our respondents were actually crying about was access to markets. They said, you've given us the funding, you've given us training, you've capacitated us. But at the end of the day, despite all this knowledge, we still don't have access to the right doors in order for us to be able to really be able to access opportunities and grow our businesses in a manner that will move us from being perpetual dependencies on government support. So that is an issue that we have actually taken very seriously as an organization, very seriously as the province in general, to say we cannot stop but focus on this because it's a responsibility that needs to be really at the center of the SMME ecosystem. Talking also about access to market in the era of the 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution. It brings another important dynamic, particularly to young entrepreneurs, to say, what opportunities are you then identifying in terms of innovation? What opportunities are you identifying in terms of making sure that you upskill yourselves in a manner that will enable you and capacitate you to be able to take up opportunities that arise? At the end of the day, we are aware that you've got Ubers, they don't own taxis. You've got Netflix, who own cinemas, and yet they are the most variable retailer. You've got Alibabas that don't have inventory. So what actually these countries demonstrate is that on a day-to-day basis, we need to seriously think beyond what the physical boundaries actually lay before us. It means we need to think beyond the geographical boundaries that we confront, because the internet just on its own opens up a world of opportunity for our small enterprises. So it does become quite concerning when you come across an entrepreneur, an SMME, and there's no website presence, just that one simple thing. So those are considerations that need to also be taken away from the session as homework for you to ponder on in terms of how best you can also expose yourselves to the relevant markets. There's also some reluctance that has been seen in terms of transforming, equipping small businesses to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. But if we stay in that space of reluctance, it will definitely be a missed opportunity for the entrepreneurs, because the country then will always be lagging behind in terms of technological advancements. So we're better off actually focusing our energy on riding the wave also of the 4IR and making sure that we capacitate ourselves as small enterprises in a manner that enables us to adapt and take full advantage of the opportunities that are actually before us. As a Department of Economic Development, we do have a mandate to actually drive the economy of Gauteng. Obviously, that is informed by the priorities that have been set at a national level, priorities that have been set at a provincial level, which then requires that we should have collaborative efforts throughout the three spheres of government. We are aware that there is what is called a 30% procurement government set aside. But the sad reality that is actually attached to that procurement set aside is that when the opportunities come, it becomes a battle to immediately identify SMMEs that are ready, that are capacitated, that are able to take up the opportunities. So that is one other challenge that I would wish to throw back at each and every single entrepreneur that is in the room right now. To say, when the opportunities arise, are you sure of your capacity to deliver? What can we do to collaboratively enable you to be able to take up such? Because remember, there's also the reputational element that our SMMEs cannot be perpetually seen to be failing to deliver on key contracts that they receive, be it in government, be it in private sector. So we need to actually move towards properly providing technical capacity so that our entrepreneurs do not become conveyor belts wherein they procure from this side and pass on to the next one. We need to get into the productive spaces and play a proper role in the value chains that exist. The two departments under economic, the MSc, it's basically the economic development as well as agriculture. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the actual interventions and programs that are in place between these two departments that could actually be of assistance to entrepreneurs in terms of access to market. In the agricultural space, there is a focus on primary agriculture. There's a focus on agro-processing. Linkages are actually being created between horticulture, vegetable farmers to fresh produce market agents, so that even those that start off as informal traders actually do get opportunities to be linked with the relevant major buyers in the market. There's also interventions that speak to making sure that there's adequate investment in the cold chain program so that the purchasing and handling of refrigerated trucks is actually part of the offtake agreements that are actually coordinated by government. Because if you are in the agricultural space, you will recognize the value of the word fresh in terms of the produce that you actually create. So if you are entering that space, you do need to ensure that the equipment that you have enables you to compete fairly with the big industry players. There's also been a collection of data at the provincial level to say who are actually the formal firms that have a supply history with the Gauteng government. So far, that database is sitting at 80,000, which means all those that are actually in business and have actually had engagements with government in terms of being able to access procurement opportunities are actually now in the process of being linked with SMMEs across government, so that we're able to make sure that the proper mentorship takes place, so that we're able to make sure that should they be awarded contracts, there is a definite benefit for the SMMEs in those contracts. But to the SMME, I'm reminding you of what I mentioned earlier, to get yourself in a state of readiness and also being able to deliver on those, so that you cannot be overlooked when it comes to partaking as subcontractors in large programs and projects of government. There's also been a targeted focus on making sure that township suppliers in particular are actually given opportunity in terms of procurement. It's not just about making sure that there's a 30% set aside that is there, which cannot ultimately be accessed by the relevant people, particularly those that are in townships. By way of example, within GEP, one of the efforts that we've actually put in place to make sure that we don't leave SMMEs with just certificates that are accumulating dust and cannot help them going forward, is that even as part of the procurement processes within the actual agency, we do make sure that we provide such opportunities to the SMMEs that we have actually already invested in, so that that can also be yet another platform for them to be able to grow their businesses. The GEP also continues to focus on the aspect of SMME support. Recently, we've had about 30 SMMEs that have benefited from government procurement opportunities through linkages that have been made by the entity. Key priorities actually do include the provision of targeted support that can actually strengthen the capacity of these SMMEs to deliver on contracts not only in government but also in the private sector. By way of example, we've had a recent partnership with the Department of Human Settlements, wherein construction SMMEs that we had previously supported as an entity were actually provided further capacitation, were actually provided further support by the department, assisted in terms of the grading requirements and the compliance requirements that they needed to make. And at the end of that journey, because it is a journey, it's not an overnight thing, at the end of that journey, at least 23% of them managed to secure contracts with the Department of Human Settlements, which is something that can actually be commended. Through one of our agencies also, which is the Gauteng Tourism Authority, we are also continuing to make sure that we prepare small businesses that are in tourism, small businesses in the creative industries in general, are also awarded opportunity to showcase their products at different platforms. Certain exhibitions are taking place locally, certain exhibitions are taking place internationally, but one word that remains key to participate in such is the issue of readiness in order for you to then be able to be exposed by the province. Because remember, once we expose you beyond the borders of Gauteng, you go out as a representative of the province, which is quite an important thing. So the Access to Market program basically does continue to be a critical priority so that we're able to create jobs in this inclusive and dynamic economy. One also consideration that needs to be put in place is exploring the broader opportunities that exist within this tourism and hospitality sector. Because on the main, you will find that most people are only interested in events management, whereas there's so much in terms of the potential that exists within that sector. So broaden your mind. If there's an issue in relation to you not being capacitated enough in terms of knowledge, we do have the Gauteng Tourism Authority that is there to be able to capacitate you in terms of broadening the knowledge, because it is only in that way that you'll be able to identify opportunities, broader opportunities within that space. Because remember, events are usually exactly that, events. They come, they go. So at the end of the day, you do need something that will enable you to drive your business beyond one single event. Also, in terms of the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, there is what is called a Trade, Investment and Regulatory Enablement Program. It's basically playing a very critical coordination role in terms of making sure that through business-to-business matchmaking activities, we are able to make sure that we seek opportunities for partnerships. We are able to ensure that we actually provide product and market access for specifically Gauteng-based enterprises. It also assists with exposure to new markets for Gauteng entrepreneurs. It also assists in terms of capital, access to capital, technology transfers, access to global value chains. If I use a simple example, GEP primarily takes care of the startup market with a view of then saying we grow you into a sustainable business, supporting you to be able to be exposed to proper access to market opportunities. At the end of that road, our sister entity, the GGDA, is then able to say to you, beyond what you have accessed locally, come and be part of the export readiness program that is being run. So there is that collaboration that is taking place also within the province. Additionally, also, as I've mentioned, there's the export readiness program. That one is actually being done in collaboration with the DTI, as well as 3 metro municipalities that provide the necessary training that build the export readiness capacity for small enterprises, so that they can also be able to diversify the export basket. There's also an issue in that between 2014-15 and 18-19, this specific program has actually benefited 1.3 small enterprises that actually stuck it out for the long haul. I mentioned earlier that it's a journey. They stuck it out for the long haul. They were able to be exposed to local opportunities and ultimately went beyond the borders of South Africa. As early as last month, we had one individual that was actually within the incubator programs that were actually running as a province. And they were identified through an exhibition and ended up being invited to Switzerland to partake in international exhibitions. So those are just some of the simple examples I can provide to say this is not something that is just necessarily theory. We do see success stories on a day-to-day basis in this regard. The private sector and the role that it plays as a critical strategic partner can also not be underestimated. And as a result, as province, we are proud to have been associated with companies such as your Coca-Colas, your Google SAs. We work with ABSA, we work with Nedbank, we work with the Manchu Group, amongst others. Because remember that in as far as access to funding is concerned, you may not necessarily be able to access immediately the formal lending channels that are there. But through collaborations between the formal banks and financiers such as GEP, we are able to support you in ways that actually do expose you to opportunities that are there. There are also various enterprise supplier development programs that are run by these partners, which enable us to also contribute towards making sure that our SMMEs do have the proper access to market opportunities. In the current financial year alone, as GEP, we are targeting a minimum of 500 SMMEs that will then be supported through partnerships. So that means that it's outside of what we are doing directly as an entity, but we are actively knocking on doors on a day-to-day basis to be sure that over and above the limited budget that we have as government, we are able to make sure that the proper access to market linkages are actually provided to SMMEs. I think, Program Director, if you'll allow me to conclude, I can indicate that we commonly know that SMMEs have a huge potential, as I've mentioned, in terms of growing the economy. We therefore cannot allow challenges such as access to funding, challenges such as access to market, to remain permanent constraints on the SMME sector. I would therefore like to call on provincial government. I would like to call on the private sector partners. I would like to specifically call on the entrepreneurs in this room today to make sure that you strategically place yourselves in a manner that exposes you and enables you to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. So we are actually trusting that the CEO's platform will serve as a starting point, will serve as an enabler in order for us to continue fostering collaborations that can actually enhance the entrepreneurs of Gauteng, particularly when it comes to the issue of access to market. Thank you.